All right, it is 12:05. Welcome everybody to this Lunch and Learn. We are learning about financial wellness in uncertain times as the cost of living continues to increase. Uh, or the cost of living continues to increase, which contributes to the economic pressure that we all feel. Join us today to learn about the different services offered by the Department of Financial Institutions and to learn how taking small but intentional steps can help contribute to our sense of economic stability. Nathan Spiecker is our presenter today, and he is the Financial Education Outreach Coordinator for Department of Financial Institutions, where he talks to communities around Washington State about financial management, budgeting, debt, and planning for the future. I am going to turn the time on over to Nathan, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Grace, for having me. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everybody who's here with us today. As Grace mentioned, my name is Nathan. I use he, him pronouns. I am the outreach coordinator here at the Department of Financial Institutions. Um, and let's just dive into it. First things first, as a state employee, I'm sure many of us are familiar with this famous disclaimer. The comments and opinions expressed today are solely my comments and my opinions. They do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Financial Institutions, its management, or anyone associated with DFI. Additionally, we cannot give legal or financial advice, and we do not endorse or recommend any person, product, or institution. So that being said, I do my best to find reliable statistics and numbers that we can sort of base our ideas on. But really, I'll try to be pretty direct about when something is my opinion versus whether it is established fact, to the extent that that's possible nowadays. Um, Really quick, I'd like to go over who we are and what we do. We are a fairly small state agency. We have about 250 staff members, so we're quite small as compared to some of the other state agencies. But I believe we perform a really important role, and that is the role of consumer protection and regulation of financial services here in Washington State. So we do four main things, including licensing, regulation, protection, and education. And really briefly, I'll just go through these. Our website is dfi.wa.gov. On our homepage, about halfway down the homepage, there's going to be a 3x3 blue grid. And on this slide, I've added a little yellow star here on the verify license button. This is really important as we're thinking about who we want to entrust to manage our money. To the extent that we have money left over after our bills are paid and all of that sort of good stuff, and we're thinking about looking at a financial advisor, for example, or an investment advisor, it's really important that these folks are properly licensed and regulated. Our agency here in Washington oversees financial advisors and investment advisors amongst a whole host of other financial products and services, including banks and credit unions, payday lenders, money transmitters, and all sorts of other things sort of in between. So I always encourage folks, verify licenses before you go and entrust someone with your money. You can do that online. You can also call our phone number, which is right up here at the very top of our website. Okay, in terms of regulation, we receive complaints from the public on a regular basis. Those complaints lead to investigations. Investigations then lead to findings and oftentimes enforcement actions. Really, if people do not complain, if the public does not complain, we have a lot less to work with as an agency. A lot of times, folks have to complain. We sort of have to be ornery in a sense in order to hold industry accountable to the laws that are on the books, right? A law is only as good as its enforcement is. You know, we can have laws on the books, and if nobody's enforcing it, in my opinion, once again, my opinion, we might as well not have a law, right? The whole point of having laws on the books is to keep folks safe, ideally, right? And so we can file complaints online. We can check out if we've taken action against a company or a person, and we can even stay up to date using our news and alerts function on our website, and that will send us periodic alerts directed to consumers just to let folks know here's what we're seeing. Here are different companies that we believe are having fraudulent practices. And in this next slide, we're going to look at what the enforcement actions look like. So really, enforcement actions come about once we've undertaken an investigation and we've found that there has been a breach of law or a breach of contract. Enforcement actions take many different shapes. They can be statements of charges, which sort of outlines what folks have done wrong, a person or a business, rather. We can send out cease and desist orders. We can issue fines. We can even deny or revoke licenses if these infractions have been sufficiently egregious or repeated. In some cases, we are able to recover costs, especially if it is a local service provider who's been doing the fraud. And you know, that is a huge help to folks who have been victimized by scams. Unfortunately, nowadays, the onus is sort of on us as individuals, as private individuals, to educate ourselves in terms of fraud and scam prevention. Of course, agencies like ours partner in education, public education efforts across the state to raise the profile on financial frauds and scams and to educate folks about what they look like and how to prevent them. Now, of course, having a handful of people doing this work for a state of millions and millions of people is a big lift. So there is a lot of personal responsibility sort of on us as well. But it is important to know that there are agencies out there who are doing the work, who are trying to hold folks accountable. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build trust in the financial system that we interact with pretty much on a daily basis, as long as we are using money in some way, shape, or form in our daily life. Last but not least, we do financial education for Washington residents. This is something we are able to offer free of charge in both English and Spanish. We can do online events, in-person events, weekdays and weekends, evenings, really, you name it, we can do it. We do financial education on a request basis. So that means that we like to have organizations or groups of folks come and request a presentation from us.
Hey, so
The
you
reason
want
for that
after
is
me
because
or,
oftentimes
sandwich?
when we've
My
tried
lunch?
to set up our own events, it has required a lot of staff time, a lot of energy, a lot of financial resources as well to get things up and running. And then as we are an agency with a rather low profile, it oftentimes is difficult to attract people to come to our events that we set up on our own. That's why we prefer working on an invitation basis. That way we can sort of meet community where they're at, identify the needs that they already express, and explore how we can best partner with them. So once again, these are free of charge. They're available all over Washington state. So if you have a group, whether it's a book club, a religious organization, a nonprofit, even just a neighborhood association or something that would like financial education, whether it's on budgeting, credit, or fraud prevention, or anything in between, we're happy to do that. Feel free to reach out to us. Of course, fraud prevention is a big portion of our work as well, and we have dedicated educational website just for that, where we can learn more about different types of fraud and how to avoid them and how to report it if we are victimized by fraud. Budgeting as well, we have resources on that on our website. And now we'll get into sort of the content of the presentation. we'll start off with a little reality check. Life is getting more expensive. We see it at the gas pump, we see it at the grocery store, we see it if we're renters by these periodic rent increases. We see it if we're homeowners by property taxes going up as well. Um, you know, I I think it's important to recognize reality for what it is to the best of our ability. And I've selected a few statistics just sort of to drive home the point of how life is getting more expensive, and people are increasingly feeling economic pressure in their day-to-day life. So we see that credit card debt has increased. It increased in Q4 of 2025 by $44 billion to a total of $1.28 trillion. $1 trillion is a million millions. That's a lot of millions. 44 billion just in Q4. Now, Q4 has a lot of holidays, granted. So it makes sense that there is a lot of spending in that quarter. And in fact, the statistics from the first quarter of 2026 indicate that, as usual, the overall credit card debt balance decreased slightly as we're starting a new year. A lot of us are trying to sort of pay down the balances that we incurred in that last quarter of last year with all of these holiday travels, gifts, and expenses related to that. So the total balance did go down slightly, but you can't have good news without having a piece of bad news accompanying it, it seems like. And the statistics from Q1 of 2026, according to the New York Federal Reserve Bank, says that over 13% of credit card balances are 90 plus days delinquent. This means that folks haven't paid their balances. 13% of these credit card balances haven't been paid in 90 days. And this is actually the highest it's been since 2011, which was, if we look at the chart, it's available. I'll send out a PDF of this slideshow if anyone wants to check out these links. But there's a graph there where we can see how credit card delinquency balances have gone up and down over time. And really what we're seeing is that this is the highest point since 2011. And 2011 was still sort of the tail end of that 2008, 2009 financial crisis, the Great Recession. And so really that is not too encouraging. And then at the same time, 78% of workers say that they would struggle to meet financial obligations if their paycheck were delayed by even a week. And now, as cost of living has risen even more, those of us who have to travel substantial amounts to and from work on a daily basis, we see it a lot. Those of us who are lucky enough to work from home, thankfully, we're fortunate to maybe save a few dollars or a few cents here and there on gas if we're wise with how much we drive, right? But all in all, the reality is looking sort of more and more challenging for working people and working families here in the United States. Now, I think as we're thinking about our finances, it's important to reflect on what we value. I believe that our values drive our behavior, our consumption habits, and our relationship with money. An article in the World Economic Forum reported that the top 5 values worldwide were family, relationships, financial security, big one there, belonging, and community. And now I have 2 reflection questions here. If you would be so kind as to put your answers in the chat if you feel comfortable. The first question is, how can my values influence my relationship with my finances? So if I value family very strongly, if I value relationships or community very strongly, how would that be reflected in my relationship with my finances? How would I put my money where my mouth is, literally speaking? And then the second question, reflection question for today, is going to be, If someone who didn't know me at all looked at my current spending habits, what would they say I value? I like to present this sort of thought experiment because I think it's quite revealing. Now, of course, we all know that our spending habits are related to our values to a certain extent, right? We still have to make ends meet. We still have to pay our utility bills. We still have to pay for housing. We still have to eat. We still have to get from point A to point B and all of the associated costs uh, with all of those daily life processes, right? But um, within our sort of discretional spending or within our money that goes above and beyond just the bare essentials, what does our spending in those categories look like, and what does that say about us? I wonder if anyone has any reflections. Okay, Grace says they would say I value my dogs. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely. Pets are can definitely be a big expense. Um, I when folks ask me if I have kids, I say no, thankfully not. I have cats because cats are a lot cheaper than kids. I think I saw an article a couple of years back saying that between ages 0 and 18, the average child costs about $250,000. In those 18 years, it's about $250,000 of expenses on average. Now, I don't know what that number looks like today. I would imagine it's a bit more, but I can tell you one thing: my cats will never cost me $250,000. As much as I love them, I don't know. I yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that there. A couple folks here in the chat say that they value their family. Yes, that's wonderful. Um, and someone says for question 2, they would say I value my dogs and comping or camping. I assume it's camping. That's cool. Yeah. So we can see that, depending on our priorities, depending on our values, we can use our money in different ways. And, my purpose here isn't to say that there is a more legitimate or a quote unquote better or worse use of our money. I think at the end of the day, what gives us joy and meaning in life is being able to align our passions with our reality, right? If we're able to sort of make those two things come together, in one. All right. Greg says golf and cruises. That's awesome. So perfect. We all have different lifestyles. We all have different things we find meaningful. And if we are able to make space for that, then that is worthwhile in my opinion. Okay. So our next idea here is going to be money as a tool and not a goal. Now I have a little bit of a longer blurb from an article in Psychology Today titled Why Money is a Great Tool but an Awful Goal. So the quote says the following: If money doesn't make us happy, why do we keep chasing it? The answer is simple. It's easier. It's much easier to focus on earning and saving money than to confront the deeper questions of life. And I want to take a pause here and recognize that a lot of times it might not even be that it's easier to focus on earning and savings than confronting the deeper questions of life. A lot of times, for an increasingly larger proportion of our population, we we don't have another alternative. If we're stuck between a rock and a hard place and we're wondering where where the money to pay our utilities is going to come from, we are going to be laser focused on that because as human beings, we are just sort of generally geared towards focusing on survival, right? And I think it's important to recognize that it does take a certain level of intentionality, but also privilege and blessing, describe that however you want, to have sort of what I would call the luxury, in air quotes, of confronting those deeper questions, right? It's so easy when we're focused on making ends meet and survival to sort of focus more on that and not really have the bandwidth or the mental or emotional energy to ask these deeper questions, right? So continuing on with what this article says, pursuing wealth provides us with a concrete target, something measurable and achievable. We hope that if we work hard enough, follow the right strategies, and make the right investments, we can get there. On the other hand, asking ourselves, what makes us truly happy? What gives my life meaning? What relationships and experiences are most important to me? Now, these are far harder questions to answer. And once again, just reflecting on our ability to reflect on these bigger questions. Of course, if we are stressed out about having enough food on the table, having enough for safe shelter. A lot of these deeper questions are probably not going to be at the front of our mind, right? Um, so I just want to address that up front, as I think it's an important reflection. All right, here's another reflection question for us. How will I give my money purpose? What steps can I take? What goals will I set? And what can I do to align my financial habits with my values? We have a comment here in the chat that says, I spend a lot of money for my family, so I guess I value them a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this is an important starting place, thinking about our values, right? We're going to talk about budgeting here in a second. But I really think it is important that we identify what our values are because, at least in my experience for me personally, it's very easy for me to get caught up in sort of the hype or marketing campaigns or advertisements about device A, B, or C, about cars A, B, or C, about houses or apartments A, B, or C, right? And I'm just sort of going with the flow and going with what I'm seeing around me, as opposed to really reflecting on what's actually going to give me purpose and meaning and joy, ultimately, and harmony in my life, not only now, but in the long term, right? Um, okay. So that's my spiel about trying to counter the whole keeping up with the Joneses mentality, which, yeah, $1.3 trillion in credit card debt is troubling. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here and think a little bit more practically. We're going to talk about budgeting, also known as spending plans. We're going to be looking at the 3 P's of spending plans. The first P is purpose. Defining our goals helps guide us on how to manage our money and make financial decisions that are best for us and for our family. It gives purpose to creating a budget. Oftentimes we need those goals to kind of help us keep going. I know for myself, I have a really hard time saving if it's not saving for something concrete, right? If I'm not specifically setting aside money for vacation or to, get a car that's gonna last me a little bit longer than the one I currently have, or to get a new phone because I cracked my phone screen, for example, it gets really easy for me to just spend money frivolously on things that, in the long term don't necessarily get me closer to the type of life I would like to live in the future. Defining those goals gives us that purpose. Number 2, the second P is our plan. Creating a budget gives us a plan to track income and expenses and to identify how to adjust so we have more control of our money. A lot of us are probably in a situation where our money controls us, where the cost of living is such that we simply have to make ends meet, and then we may not have very much bandwidth to think about any money if there is money left over once we have made those ends meet. creating a budget is just helpful. At least for me, it's been very helpful to be able to see where my money's going, right? And once I see where it's going, I can identify how to adjust. Those adjustments, of course, are made based on my own priorities and my own values. What I determine is essential, what I determine is sort of discretionary, how I can try to cut costs in different ways. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the goal is to have more control of our money. All right, and now the third P of these spending plans is power. Increasing our awareness of our complete financial situation can help reduce stress, it can help build wealth, and it can help increase our power to make informed decisions so we can reach our financial goals. Once again, the idea here really is to be informed, because there's no way that we can reach our goals if we don't know where our starting point is. I can set a goal that I want to walk to Eugene, Oregon, but if I don't know where I'm starting off from right now, I don't know if I have to walk north, south, east, or west. And I don't know how far I have to walk, right? So having a good idea of what my baseline looks like is an important first step to establishing those goals and breaking that down into little bite-sized pieces that we can do one at a time. Okay, let's talk about tracking and categorizing expenses. Tracking expenses helps show us exactly where our money goes. And there are so many different ways we can track our expenses. We can use applications, we can use a spreadsheet, or we can even use a simple notebook to record our daily or weekly spending. The important thing here is to pick something that works for our routines, right? If we don't pick something that's gonna make sense for our lifestyle and for our routines, odds are we're not going to stick to it. For myself, that means having an app that links with my bank accounts. I know not everybody's comfortable with that. And that way transactions automatically import. Before I had that application, I would have to write down every single one of my expenses on a daily basis, because I am so scatterbrained that I can't remember what I had for breakfast the day prior, right? Well, I can, but that's only because I eat the same thing for breakfast every single day. Point being, I had to record my expenses on a daily basis, otherwise I would forget them, right? Now, once we have recorded these expenses, we can categorize them into a few different categories. And these are just some examples that I think are helpful for me. We have fixed expenses. Now, these are expenses that are recurring and that have a fixed price day in and day out, right? So generally, my rent is going to be pretty fixed, right? Until the end of my lease, in which case my property managing agent raises my rent, and then I have to get used to that new fixed amount. Bills, such as insurance premiums, for example, among other bills, subscriptions as well, those tend to be the same price, and they tend to be recurring either on a monthly or every 6-month basis, right? So these are things we can reasonably estimate ahead of time and that we can reasonably budget for. Now, we'll move on to variable expenses, which in my mind are expenses that are still necessary for day-to-day life, things like groceries, gas, utilities. But of course, we do have some level of control, even if it is a tiny level of control over how much this comes up to, right? So with groceries, for example, maybe we can be selective about where we're buying our groceries to sort of make our dollars stretch a little bit more. With gas, we might think about creating an itinerary so that we can do all 5 of our errands in one trip, as opposed to doing a trip for each errand and burning up additional gas sort of in the process, right? For utilities, we can turn off the lights when we're not in the room and try to use less water and such, turn the thermostat down, different things like that, where of course we're still going to have to pay for groceries, gas, and utilities, but depending on our level of use we can sort of have a little bit of an effect on how expensive it turns out to be. And then finally, we have discretionary spending. This would be dining out, this would be entertainment, our hobbies, really anything that we don't strictly need to survive, but that still provide us with a lot of meaning, a lot of joy, a lot of comfort in our lives. Let's say that. Knowing our spending patterns helps us spot opportunities to save and to make financial decisions that align with our priorities, right? Um, and then a tip here is regular tracking keeps our budget realistic and effective. We should make changes to our budget as our lifestyle changes, as our financial situation changes. Our budget should be a living tool. If we get an increase in pay now in about a month or so, I think we're due to get a little 2% cost of living adjustment. So that is a good opportunity for us to take another look at our budget and say, all right, with this additional 2% minus taxes, how much extra do I have? How much more do I have than I had before? And where am I going to allot that to? So we have the Federal Trade Commission has developed this budgeting worksheet tool. Why I like this tool is because it provides us a way to track our income and expenses without putting judgment statements on it. There's no wants and needs. There's no good or bad expenses. It's just personal expenses, school expenses, food expenses, housing expenses, right? So it is really sort of customizable to each one of our different priorities and lifestyles. Okay, so I think we have about 7 minutes left in our presentation, 7, 8 minutes left. Is that right, Grace?
Yeah, we can open that up for questions or yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I will take, let's see, I'll take 2 minutes here to try to get through the remaining slides. I know not great time management, but I do want to take questions here at the end. So I'll just graze through these topics sort of briefly, and then if we do have follow-up questions on any of them, we can do that. I'd rather sort of address what questions folks have rather than drone on and on about something that may or may not be as relevant to our lives. So tackling debt consistently is going to be really important, especially in times of uncertainty. If our employment situation is unstable, if we're unsure about our ability to generate income and to make ends meet on a regular basis in the future, tackling debt is going to be really, really important because when things hit the fan, debt still stays there, right? We still have to pay down that debt. And being between a rock and a hard place and having to pick whether we're going to pay our utility bills or pay our credit card bill is a really challenging situation that I don't want any of us to be in. So making consistent progress on those debts is going to be really important. We can identify all of our current debt by going to annualcreditreport.com and we can get free copies of our credit reports. Please dispute any errors on your credit reports. And then we can make a list of all of our lines of credit, including the interest rate and the remaining balance. A lot of people choose to prioritize paying off secured debt, such as a mortgage, a car loan, a home equity line of credit, over unsecured debt like credit cards, personal loans, and medical debt. And mainly that tends to be because this secured debt does have an asset like your home or your car as collateral. So if I default on my payments on my car, that means that the bank can repossess my car, which just sort of creates this cascading effect where one problem turns into two, which turns into three. If I don't have a car, I can't get to and from work, right? Or it becomes a lot more challenging, right? So for that reason, a lot of people choose to prioritize paying off that secured debt. A couple common strategies to reduce debt are the snowball method and the avalanche method. It really just depends on how we work, whether we need those quick little wins, in which case it would be a snowball method, paying off the smaller debt first, or if we would like to save money by saving on how much money we're paying in interest, which would be the avalanche method, where we take on the biggest amount of debt first. Once again, there's a little reducing debt worksheet here, which I'll send out later on. I will mention this. First off, if we need help, talk to our creditors. Sometimes they're able to work with us on a new payment plan. If not, please do talk to a credit counselor. There is the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, which is nfcc.org. They will connect you to a credit counselor locally who is trained in consumer finance. They can teach us how to budget and manage our money, and they can even work with us to create a personalized plan to help us get out of debt. These are folks who work with people who are in debt and who have issues with credit all the time. So they know exactly what programs are still available. They know what sort of debt forgiveness is available, what sort of consolidation loans are available, and really what would be the best fit for you based on your situation, based on your income, your debt burden, and your priorities, right? So I would highly recommend this. Just to be transparent, some of these do charge a little bit of money, but in my humble opinion, I would say that if we're in a tough place with debt, it is probably a worthwhile investment to talk to a credit counselor. Okay. All right. Building an emergency fund is also a really important part of financial wellness and financial stability. That emergency fund helps us avoid going into debt into the future if things go wrong, right? So if I don't have an emergency fund and my car pops a tire, right, I have to get that replaced. But if I don't have money to pay for it, I have to go into debt, right? So then it creates, once again, this sort of cascading effect of negativity and of difficulty in my life. So what I encourage folks to do is think about their monthly expenses. What are your bare essentials? Set an achievable goal. Maybe we start with a goal of $500 between now and December, let's say. Once we hit $500, then we can increase that to $1,000. Once we hit $1,000, then we can maybe increase that to try to get a month's worth of bare essentials. That gives us the peace of mind to know that even if something happens, I can pay rent for a month, I can pay my utilities, I can pay my groceries for a month. Of course, I'll have to cut back on some of my discretional spending, but at least I will be somewhat solvent for even if it is a short period of time. And then thinking about the future, we want to continue to work towards a healthy and robust retirement. Any sort of goals we have for the future, whether that's a down payment, planning for the next generation's education, all of these sorts of long-term goals. Consistency is going to be really important in this. And we can start small and sort of scale up as our situation improves. So really, these are 3 practical goals: paying down debt, establishing an emergency fund, and contributing to our future well-being. They can all be done through automating savings, automating payments, that sort of stuff. That helps me a lot, just to keep my mind on the here and now and not be worried about that, because I know it's happening automatically. And these are small but impactful steps that over time can have a serious impact on our financial well-being. All right, I think I'm gonna just go ahead and go to question time now because I way overdid my 2 minutes. But I'll take questions now if anyone has questions. I've also put my contact information up here on the screen. If anyone has questions, if anyone would like resources on any of these topics, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction, and I'm not afraid to say that I don't know if I don't know, but I'll try to find someone who does know. So thank you all for your attention.
Right. Are there any questions that people have for Nathan? He is a wealth of knowledge. This is probably my fourth or fifth presentation. Ari's asking, does DFI set the per diem rates?
No, DFI does not set the per diem rates. That would be OFM, the Office of Financial Management. If you want to talk to them about increasing the per diem rates, I travel a lot, so I would not be opposed to that. Um, Actually, you know what? I wonder if it is OFM. You know what? The per diem rates might even be set by the federal government now that I come to think of it. I think there are some of them, some per diem rates that are. There's like a baseline. That would be a good question for OFM in either case. Yeah. GSA sets the federal rates. Yeah. Hmm. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions here? Um, do you recommend an app for expense tracking, a trusted app? So, as I sort of said at the top of the presentation, we can't really recommend specific apps. If you Google like top 5 budgeting apps, Forbes has a constantly updated list of apps that they like to refer to. Me personally, I use an app called YNAB. It stands for You Need a Budget. Um, and I like that just because it makes sense to me. We can set our own goals on there, can link up with your bank account. You can also not link it with your bank account and manually enter in um, enter in your transactions. It's helpful for me just to have one place where I can go in and see everything as opposed to opening up 3 different banking apps and trying to collect it all on a piece of paper. It just helps me stay on top of my expenses. They do have, I think they do require a payment. I think it's around $120 a year, which once again, in my mind, for my situation, I feel like it's a worthwhile investment for me. But I know not everyone's sort of on the same page, or it's not a tool that works for everybody. I'll just say that, and not everyone is as comfortable with the idea of giving apps access to your bank accounts, which I can understand. Okay, so Greg is saying that the survey does not contain today's presentation as a choice to fill out the survey.
That's
So I think
that's my bad.
in
I'm fixing that right now.
okay, um, and I think if the survey you're talking about is the one with this QR code here on the screen, that's probably on my end. In which case, you could either put in budgeting or saving, really, whichever one you'd like. I only have one presentation going on today, so I'll know which one it's for.
Okay, the one that I put in the chat for ours, that's fixed now. Thank you, Greg.
Okay, perfect. All right, y'all. Well, if there are no other questions, once again, I just want to say thank you for your time and thank you, Grace, for setting this up. I really
Mhm.
appreciate the opportunity. Um, if any of you hear of any organizations or groups that are interested in further financial wellness or financial education, please have them reach out to me. We're always looking for new partnerships. We're always looking to sort of expand our horizons and spread the good news of financial education and the tools and tips contained therein.
Thank you. And Nathan's going to be with us again in August on the 26th, talking a little bit more about the things that DFI does. So
Mhm.
if you haven't gotten that link, you will get it soon. So yeah, thank you, Nathan.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Mhm.
Have a great rest of your afternoon.